Hello, my dear friends, and welcome back to Boss Economic World, where we slice through the political spin like a hot knife through some very expensive, tariff-laden butter. Today, we have a fascinating story. It's November 17, 2025. The White House has just announced a grand gesture. President Donald Trump, in an act of presidential benevolence, has issued an executive order. He's reducing tariffs on things you love: your morning coffee, that juicy steak for dinner, the tomatoes in your salad, the bananas in your smoothie. The official story? Oh, it's a beautiful one. The White House says, "We've looked at the numbers, and it turns out we can't grow enough of these things in America to meet our insatiable demand. So, to help you, the hard-working American consumer, we're cutting these trade levies to lower prices at the grocery store." U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer, with the timing of a seasoned actor, told us this was all part of the grand strategy. He said, and I quote, "This is a natural outgrowth of exactly what the president signaled." A natural outgrowth. Beautiful, isn't it? It sounds so organic. Like a carefully cultivated plant that has finally, at the perfect moment, blossomed. The narrative is simple. The president, a master negotiator, used tariffs as a big stick, got what he wanted, and is now magnanimously handing out the rewards. He's the hero who is now single-handedly fighting the high prices that have been plaguing your wallets. But here at Boss Economic World, we don't just read the press release. We look at the why. Why now? If this was always the plan, why does this natural outgrowth feel so much like a desperate scramble? Why does it smell less like a blossoming flower and more like panic? Let's peel back the layers of this economic onion, shall we? And fair warning, it might make you cry. To understand this move, you don't need a PhD in economics. You just need a calendar. What happened last week? The Republican Party took a beating in several key state and local elections. And what was the number one issue on the lips of voters from suburban Arizona to rural Pennsylvania? Affordability. The cost of living. The gnawing feeling that your paycheck is a melting ice cube on a hot summer day. For years, President Trump has been the Tariff Man. His core belief, which he has repeated like a mantra, is that tariffs are a magic tool. He imposes them, and foreign countries pay for them. He has claimed that foreign sellers would just lower their prices to absorb the cost, leaving you, the American consumer, completely unharmed. But here's the reality check, and it's a brutal one. Look at this chart. This is your grocery bill. And this is your paycheck. One line is going to the moon, the other is stuck in traffic. For the average American family, the cost of food has risen by an estimated 35% since 2022. That's not a statistic, that's the difference between buying fresh fruit or settling for canned. That's the stress you feel at the checkout counter. The voters just sent a very clear message: they're not buying the foreigners will pay argument anymore. They know who's paying. They see it on every receipt. This tariff reduction isn't a proactive strategy, it's a reactive, political tourniquet. It's a tacit, unspoken admission from the White House that, maybe those tariffs did add to the price pressures on U.S. consumers after all. An anonymous White House official basically admitted it, saying the president is adjusting levies as needed. As needed is Washington speak for when the polling numbers get scary. So, the first layer of our onion is pure political survival. The Tariff Man is trying to rebrand himself as the affordability president because his political future depends on it. Now let's get specific. Let's talk about beef. Americans love beef. It's part of our national identity. But lately, getting a good steak has required taking out a small loan. Prime ribeye prices are up nearly 50% in the last 2 years, hitting an all-time high of over $25 a pound in many cities. Why? It's a classic story of supply and demand, with a Trumpian plot twist. The supply problem: the American cattle herd is at its smallest size in over 70 years. Years of drought in the West and Midwest, coupled with soaring feed costs, have forced ranchers to shrink their herds. It takes years to rebuild a cattle population. You can't just 3D print a cow. So, domestic supply is way down. The demand story, meanwhile, American demand for beef remains incredibly strong. People want their burgers and their brisket. So you have supply way down here, and demand way up here. The natural result? Prices go through the roof. The logical economic solution would be to fill the gap with imports. Countries like Argentina, Brazil, and Australia are more than happy to sell us their world-class beef. The tariff plot twist, but this is where the Tariff Man logic came in. To protect American ranchers, the administration had slapped significant levies on imported beef. This created a bizarre situation. It's like your house is on fire, and you decide to put a roadblock up to stop the fire department from reaching you. The policy made imported beef more expensive, pushing the already high price of domestic beef even higher. Consumers paid the price. But here's the kicker: even the American ranchers, the very people the tariffs were meant to protect, were getting nervous. The backlash against the recent hint of boosting purchases from Argentina was real. They felt betrayed. First, they were told they'd be protected from foreign competition. Now, with the administration suddenly reversing course out of desperation, it creates massive uncertainty. They can't plan for the future. This tariff reduction on beef is not a celebration of a successful policy. It's a surrender to basic economic gravity. The administration is acknowledging that you cannot have a small domestic supply, high tariffs on imports, and low prices. It's impossible. You have to pick two. For years, they chose small supply and high tariffs. Now, thanks to voter anger, they're being forced to abandon one of them. If the beef story is a lesson in basic economics, the coffee story is a masterclass in how geopolitics can ruin your morning routine. America runs on coffee. But we produce almost none of it. Less than 0.1% of what we consume. We are completely reliant on imports, with Brazil being our single largest supplier of the Arabica beans that form the base of most coffee blends. So, what did we do? We picked a massive fight with our main dealer. Since July, Brazilian exports, including coffee, have faced the prospect of a staggering 50% tariff. Now, this is where it gets complicated and, frankly, absurd. This wasn't one tariff, it was two. First, there was a 10% reciprocal tariff, part of a broader trade tit for tat. But the big one, the 40% sledgehammer, was explicitly political. It was intended to punish Brazil over the prosecution of its former president, Jair Bolsonaro, who was a close ally of President Trump. Let me repeat that. You have been paying more for your morning latte, your cappuccino, your humble cup of Folgers, because of a political drama surrounding a former president in South America. The numbers are shocking. Between August and October of this year, with these tariffs looming, American purchases of Brazilian coffee beans fell by over 50%. The market reacted exactly as you'd expect. Coffee futures on the commodities exchange went ballistic, hitting a new record high. Roasters across the US, from Starbucks to your local artisanal shop, had to either eat the massive cost increase or, more likely, pass it on to you. A standard bag of coffee at the supermarket that was $8 2 years ago is now pushing $14. So, what does Friday's relief do? Does it get rid of this insane 50% tariff? No. Of course not. That would be too logical. The White House has proudly announced they are exempting coffee from the 10% tariff. The punishing 40% political levy? That stays. This is like someone setting your house on fire, then showing up with a single glass of water, putting out a tiny flame on the curtains, and expecting you to thank them for being a hero while the rest of the house burns down. It is a purely symbolic gesture designed to generate a positive headline. It allows the president to say, "I'm lowering coffee prices," while keeping his political weapon against Brazil firmly in place. The bulk of the price pressure remains. It is a cynical, calculated move that provides almost no real relief to consumers or coffee roasters but gives the administration a talking point. So, let's zoom out. This isn't just about beef and coffee. The list of exemptions includes cocoa, nuts, avocados, pineapples, and critically, many types of fertilizer. Why fertilizer? Because tariffs on fertilizer from places like Morocco and Russia drove up the costs for American farmers, which in turn drove up the cost of the food they grow, which you then buy. It's a vicious cycle, a snake eating its own tail. The administration is finally realizing that you can't win a trade war when you're bombing your own supply lines. This entire episode reveals the fundamental flaw in the Tariff Man philosophy. Global trade in the 21st century is not a simple game of us versus them. It's a deeply interconnected network, a complex machine. Trump's tariff strategy was like taking a sledgehammer to that machine, smashing random parts to see what would happen. Now, the machine is sputtering. The US farm trade deficit is widening because we are fundamentally reliant on other countries for tropical products, certain minerals, and other goods. We are importing nearly $40 billion in these kinds of goods this year alone. Coffee accounts for a third of that. Trying to wall ourselves off was never going to work, it was just going to make everything inside the walls more expensive. This flurry of activity, the tariff exemptions, the new deals announced with Guatemala, El Salvador, and Ecuador, is not the action of a confident strategist executing a master plan. It's the frantic action of someone playing a game of Jenga. For years, they've been pulling out block after block tariffs on steel, on aluminum, on Canadian lumber, on Chinese electronics, on Brazilian coffee. The tower got taller and more unstable. Now, it's wobbling violently. The voters are shouting. So they're trying to desperately and carefully slide a few blocks back in, a beef block here, a coffee block there, hoping to stop the whole thing from crashing down before the 2026 midterms, and certainly before the 2028 presidential election. So what does this all mean for you? First, any relief you feel at the grocery store will be minimal and temporary. A 10% reduction on a product still facing a 40% tariff is a drop in a very expensive bucket. Second, this is the most expensive "I told you so" in recent economic history. This entire painful cycle of tariffs, price hikes, and now panicked reversals is a tacit admission that the core premise of the trade war was flawed. Economic studies from virtually every credible institution, from the Peterson Institute to the National Bureau of Economic Research, have shown that the vast majority of tariff costs, over 90%, are passed on to domestic consumers and businesses. It was never the foreigners who paid. It was you. Finally, this reveals the true nature of modern economic policy. It's a chaotic dance between ideology, political reality, and market forces. The ideology was tariffs are good. The market force was prices are skyrocketing. And the political reality was voters are angry. In the end, political reality always wins. So when you read the headlines about President Trump's gift to your wallet, remember the full picture. This isn't a gift. It's a partial refund on a policy that cost you dearly. It's an attempt to fix a self-inflicted wound, but with a band-aid that's too small and applied far too late. The truth is, the Tariff Man has learned a hard lesson in basic economics. And you, the American consumer, paid for the tuition. Don't just follow the headlines, understand the real story behind them. This is Boss Economic World. I'll see you next time.